walking the serpentine path, following the footsteps of the ancestors, walking the serpentine path, making our way back home. Hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho, hey ya, hey ya, hey ya, ho, hey ya, hey, hey ya, ho. Following the serpentine path, life. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Serpentine Path podcast. My name is Claire Waudia Seed, and I'm a plant walker, song keeper, word weaver, artisana, visual and performance artist, womb wisdom keeper, and your guide on this serpentine path of life. Together, we'll dive deep into all things related to plant medicine, ancestral reconnection, intergenerational healing, womb sovereignty and bodily autonomy, rites of passage and initiation, time travel, shape-shifting, dimension hopping, the reclamation of our collective earth-based practices, and the ongoing, never-ending cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Welcome to the serpentine path where the ancestors have called us back to. Let's start at the end and find our way back home together. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Serpentine Path podcast. I have a really wonderful guest here today, Christina Willis. Thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm incredibly excited to see what unfolds.
Thank you. I'm excited and honored to be here.
Beautiful. Well, let's start out with the question that I have been asking all of my guests who come on, which is, if your ancestors were here with us now, which of course they always are, how would they introduce you, and what role would they say that you play in your family lineage?
Yeah. First of all, I have to say that I just love this question. I'm so obsessed with it. I think if my ancestors were to introduce me, they would introduce me as their beloved daughter, grandmother, sister, aunt, um, who is cherished and valued, protected, um, who they are grateful to for agreeing to take on the karmic earth contract again, to unwind all of the things that need to be unwound in the lineage and to weave in new, better, lighter, softer threads. The role that I play in my family lineage in this timeline, I reincarnated as an African American, the descendant of enslaved Africans in the United States. My great great grandparents were sharecroppers, so I don't have to go back very far. And my role in that is I straight up came back to not be a slave, to fully embody freedom, to embody ease and joy, and to experience all the pleasure and liberation and freedom of thought and movement that has been denied my ancestors within the last 400 years. And to more importantly, remember to remind my lineage that being a descendant, a direct descendant of African peoples, we were the first ones to pull up on Earth. We've been here the longest, which means that the majority of my bloodline was free, never knew enslavement. And my role is to return us to that, to remind us of our true identity. And that is of really the identity of being the mothers of humanity, who were birthed into freedom and who continue to birth into freedom. So, yeah, my role is to be as free as possible and to maybe potentially one day birth children who are even more free than I am.
Ooh, wow. That's really, really beautiful. I mean, I have like chills and like tears, and I feel like every time that I ask people this question, I feel their ancestors come in, and the way that a person starts to speak is like so different, like you see their whole spiritual team just like show up, and what a beautiful, beautiful reminder of like the immense length of time scale that human beings currently forget about, that like we think like this is how it's always been, and this is the reality of what my peoples have always experienced and moved through and expressed, and what they hold in their hearts, like that's just the truth of who we are. And that reminder that like our perspective of time is so distorted and so warped and so much um shorter than like the true reality of what you just spoke to, which is like my people were free and my people know how to be free, and that's my work in this life, is to remember like that's my truth. Truly, that's truth at the end of the day. So thank you. It's beautiful. Well, I like to give people a little bit of context of like how I know my guests and how I bring them on. So you and I connected originally back in November when I joined what is now called the Holy Well, used to be called the Womb Room, which is a space that is stewarded by Kiddush, who was a guest on a few episodes back. And wow, that container was super strong. What we were working through, sovereign cycles. I've spoken a little bit on sovereign cycles on the podcast, but essentially, sovereign cycles was, I guess, a 3-month long practitioner level training around working with plants for pregnancy prevention. Part of that is like supporting abortion outside of the system, but there's a lot that we learned. It was not just that. And wow, what an immense initiation to move through with an incredible group of women who showed up to do that work. And you were one of those people. And I got to know you a little bit throughout that educational process. And then kind of like learning more about you and your offerings specifically with astrology has been really cool, because I don't know anyone actually who has the take on astrology that you have, which is super exciting. And I'm excited to like give you space to hear more about it. But yeah, I would say just take it away, introduce yourself. I'd love to hear about your path, what your life has looked like, what everything has kind of like brought you to this moment, what you're orienting towards. What's your work? What are you doing?
Thank you. Yeah. Oh man, what's important to share? Where should I start? Um, so yes, I am a self-identified astrologer, which I think we'll have opportunity to get more into what that even means in this modern context. But I consider myself an ancestral astrologer because I do my best to weave in and incorporate as much of indigenous African astrology practices as I can, and indigenous African cosmology frameworks as I can into the way that I interpret charts and current transits and anything to do with astrology. And so, primarily in this moment, that looks like for me studying the mythology and the zodiac and the interpretations of ancient Kemetic peoples. For those that don't know, Kemet was Egypt before it was colonized by Rome and Greece. And Kemet was formed by multiple indigenous African groups from actually the entire continent. You can kind of think of Kemet as the United States, in that there are people from all over the world that live here, and there really isn't one primary ethnic group. And Kemet was similar in that there are people from all over Africa that had come there to collaborate and combine their knowledge and their expertise and their artistry. And for several thousands of years, Kemet was really this epicenter of the world. And if you wanted to learn anything, people from, you know, Asia and Europe, like they knew that you went to Kemet, right, to study and learn. So it's very important to me to honor that and bring those practices into the modern day, because as far as I know, they were responsible for the first people responsible for this 12 sign zodiac from Aries to Pisces that we are familiar with today. It also looks like me incorporating cosmology frameworks from the Dagara people of Burkina Faso, and Ghana and the Ivory Coast, and their framework for how, they divide up the elements and see the energies of the universe working, and also to the cosmology of the Dogon. In fact, the specific Kemetic tradition I practice is of the Dogon lineage. And the Dogon were people who, while Kemet was being invaded, they escaped and left Kemet with preserving as much of their knowledge as they could. And they went off into West Africa, kind of in the middle of the desert, to keep it safe and protected. So I weave that in, and I also, it is because of the destruction and devastation that has been perpetrated against Africa. The people who are holding on to the indigenous knowledge of that continent have it locked down as they should. And so until I'm able to go through proper initiation process, there's going to be a limit on the knowledge that I can access in regards to those things. So to supplement that, the other half of my practice is also the Vedic tradition of India. And so combining these two methods to bring about interpretations of a birth chart and of astrology. And of course, I still do, engage with or research the Hellenistic tradition of Greece, with a grain of salt, of course, because it's all repackaged Kemetic tradition pretty much anyway. I use astrology, I like to say, to un-gaslight people and to confirm that, yes, your mother was really like that. Astrology can be used for so many things, and its first use ever 10,000 years ago was for basically predicting the best times to do certain things in agriculture, to plant and to harvest, to predict when there might be a drought, or a famine, or a bunch of locusts coming to take down your crops. And it was also used to predict if ships would return, and was used in the form of medical astrology to help people navigate their health. So I do use it for medical astrology, but in the modern realm, a newer application that kind of developed in the 1900s in the US actually was more of like psychological astrology. And so I would say that my practice is probably more like that. I'm not necessarily using psychological principles, but I am using astrology to help people navigate their inner emotional worlds and psyches and childhoods and relationship patterns and all of these things. As far as my path and my work, I first got introduced to astrology in 2020. I like to say it was my pandemic hobby. While everyone else was learning how to bake bread, I was learning how to read charts. And I got put on to sidereal astrology specifically by one of my classmates, because I was in film school at the time. And she introduced me to this sidereal astrologer. Her name is Dana Lynn Knuckles of People's Oracle. I no longer follow her. I'm not necessarily in alignment with her teachings or political perspective anymore, but I was deeply immersed in her framework and was a student of hers for a few years until I left in 2023 and started looking more into indigenous African astrology and Vedic astrology. Um, but before that, I was in film school. I did, finish, but I really thought I wanted to be a filmmaker and an editor specifically. I'm from Phoenix, grew up there my whole life practically, and I've had a very interesting upbringing, like growing up in very white suburbs, being used to being like the only Black kid in class very often, and that definitely shapes how I read charts, how I orient to clients. And while many of those experiences were difficult growing up, it also gave me a lot of opportunities that maybe a lot of other people wouldn't have had. Um, and has also allowed me, I think, to be a more compassionate astrologer and understand a variety of lived experiences for my clients because I have the experience of being an outsider and having to spend so much of my life in formative years learning how to be comfortable immersed in a foreign culture and really having to be challenged to understand people who are a lot different from me. So, yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. And it's funny, something you were talking about, kind of towards the beginning. Wait, I want to make sure I say this correct. Kemet or Kemet?
I've heard it said both ways.
Okay.
I usually say Kemet, but I don't. Yeah, I think both are fine.
Okay. Yeah, it was making me think about what we were talking about before recording, how you were saying, like, I've made this soul contract to be an American, to be a United States citizen, and how you were saying that Kemet was people from all over the world, and you literally compared it to the United States. And so I think it's like very, very fascinating that you're able to kind of make that connection of like, this is where my people's knowledge like really came from. And like my work in this life is to keep bringing it forth as well, which is really exciting. And something that you were talking about, like with the Dogon people and how they kind of moved from that region kind of deeper into the desert. It reminds me a lot of like my own spiritual lineage in South America where when colonizers came, all of the peoples like fled from the other places that were like a lot easier to be accessed and for them to experience like insane degrees of colonization and persecution and violence and murder and all the horrible things that come with it. They fled into like the jungles and they fled really, really high up into the mountains. And so it's this beautiful process that we see of like people who understand, like, okay, where do we need to go geographically to maintain like the safekeeping of these teachings? And then knowing that at a certain point, the world will be ready for it to come forth. And a lot of the time, the reason that it comes forth is because people like us start finding people like them. Like we start being like, okay, I'm ready to like go into the desert. I'm ready to go into the jungle. I'm ready to go up to the high Andes. I'm ready to find those elders. And that's when they know like, okay, it's time to come back. And so that's really cool. And just beautiful, like everything that you're doing to interweave also different traditions too. I think we're at this time in humanity where there is such a insane kind of like cross-cultural conversation, globalization, all of the negatives that come with it that I've really harped on in the past, but more and more I'm seeing a lot of the beauty of it. That like we can have someone who's like you, who's here in the United States, who's going deep into like her indigenous African astrology, but then also interweaving all of this beautiful Vedic lineage and these Vedic teachings and being able to understand like the ripples throughout cultures and how every region and every land base and every tradition does have something special that it brings to it. And also, there is like a singular truth that usually threads through all of that information, too. So it's really cool. Um, all right, cool. So let's get into some astrology stuff. So, what has been going on in the stars recently? What do you want to share about?
Oh my goodness. I feel like a better question is what has not been going on. and the stars. This is such an interesting time for us astrologically, which I know is maybe a little funny to say because I feel like astrologers are always saying that. But we are currently, as of today, April 22nd, still in the midst of two retrograde shadows. For those that don't know, shadow periods come before and after a planet is actually retrograde, which means when a planet's retrograde from our perspective on Earth, it looks like in the sky it's moving backwards. Thank God planets don't actually move backwards. But to us, it looks like they do. And so we have these shadow periods that happen before and after any planet retrogrades. And right now we're in the post shadow period of Venus's retrograde and also Mercury's retrograde. And we spent most of the last half of March and kind of like the first half of April in that energy. And both these planets are retrograding through sidereal Pisces. And what that means for us is, well, let me keep going. In addition to that, on March 29th, Saturn entered sidereal Pisces after being in Aquarius for 2.5 years. And we also had a solar eclipse that same day in Pisces. And we are currently finishing out our transit, our year-long transit of Jupiter through sidereal Taurus. Jupiter will leave Taurus and enter Gemini on May 14th. And we just finished a Mars retrograde as well. Mars stationed direct. It stopped moving backwards on February 23rd, but it's still in the sign that it retrograded in and will be in that sign in Cancer until June 6th. So we're in a lot. Retrogrades allow us to like take a pause and reassess what we're doing. And so coming out of like 3 planets being retrograde, we're just in this period of like really reassessing what's actually going on, what we actually want, how I actually want to move forward. With all this energy that we have in Pisces, Pisces is the final sign of the zodiac. It's a sign that's ruled by Jupiter. It's a water sign. And so it has a lot to do with spirituality and the psychic realm and the metaphysical realm. And really on a more practical level, our intuition and how our intuition allows us to discern the truth and come to conclusions. And when I say intuition, I mean like the emotional and physiological reactions and processes that we have in our body and what they tell us about our environment. So a weird feeling in your stomach, goosebumps, hair standing up on your skin, your dreams, these are all ways that intuition specifically manifests through Pisces. On top of that, like I said, it's a Jupiter ruled planet. And so Pisces has a lot to do with our intention, specifically our spiritual intention. And so we are really in this time of getting super clear on what is our intention for relationships with Venus still transiting through Pisces, and what is our intention in communicating and talking and having conversations and analyzing and organizing things with with the Mercury retrograde that we just finished in Pisces as well. And then with Saturn here, Saturn is going to be in Pisces until like February 23rd of 2028. And Saturn, I like to say it's a manifester planet. And which may sound weird because I know we're so used to Saturn being this doom and gloom planet, and like it definitely is that. But Saturn brings doom and gloom or destruction and like breaks things down. So that way, there's just like flat, level ground to build something way better than there was before. And it slows things down and it makes us work really hard for a very long time, because the goal of Saturn is to teach us that anything worth having, anything that's going to stand the test of time, is going to require a lot of work, a lot of effort, and a lot of time. And so transiting through Pisces, these next 3 years are about us putting in a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of time into honing our intuition and our psychic abilities so that we can get really good at cultivating trust within our bodies, internal knowing, to be sure of ourselves, of the truth. And I think especially with, at least in the States, our current political climate and, our government and the president, like, of course, before Trump, like, we were being lied to. But now it's kind of more obvious to many people just how deep the misinformation and the untruths are. We're all in a process of learning what it looks like, what it feels like to really trust ourselves. What is the difference between feeling something in our bodies because we're feeling the truth and feeling something in our bodies because we're feeling triggered and we're assigning meaning to something where it doesn't actually fit and belong. Um, in addition to that, like I said, we are still coming out of this Mars retrograde energy. And Mars is similar to Saturn in that it is also a manifestor planet. Its job is like Saturn to destroy things, to break them down. So that way there's a blank canvas, a plain field to build something new and better. It moves much quicker than Saturn, though. So it can help us accomplish the same things as Saturn faster. But because it's going faster, it's also going to be a lot more chaotic, not as neat and cute. Not like Saturn's doing things in a neat and cute way, but it's much more chaotic and disruptive in its process of doing that. And going through sidereal Cancer, Cancer is a water sign like Pisces. So it is also about the body and our emotions, but because it's a cardinal sign, it's specifically about how we are regulating our bodies, how we are regulating our emotions. So Cancer is really the sign of like, I'm going to have a regular bedtime. I'm going to stretch in the mornings. I'm going to meal prep every weekend. These are the things that I'm going to do to take care of my biology and my physiology. And Cancer is also the sign of our home, like where we're living, what we consider to be home, and our families. And so, with Mars transiting through that, we are all in this process of really disrupting how we're taking care of our bodies, how we're meeting the biological and physiological and emotional needs of ourselves, of other people, specifically our families, our communities, those that are familiar to us, who, are higher on our priority list of like who we're going to extend care to. And it's really about us making a split and a severance from how we previously oriented to those things. And it's also too a lot about us protecting those same things, protecting our bodies, protecting our families. Actually, the day that Mars stationed retrograde in Cancer was December 6th of 2024. And that same day, which was like so crazy how this synced up. Luigi Mangione, shot this healthcare CEO. And before that happened, I was not interpreting Mars in Cancer as being about protecting the body. But that was such a literal thing that happened, right? This murder, assassination, or defense, however you want to look at it, was enacted because healthcare CEOs are tripping, right? And they're tripping. And they're making it very hard for any of us to regulate ourselves and meet our needs. And here is this act of this man being like, no, I'm actually going to stand up to that. I'm going to attempt to fight back and protect and defend my right, our rights to like access healthcare, to be healthy. So, not to say that that specific energy has necessarily been prevailing for everyone or even anyone for this transit, but it is, part of what we're going through is like the drive behind changing our family situation, our living situation, how we're tending to our bodies is from the stance of like, I'm going to protect and preserve myself and what is valuable to me as far as what it's going to take to meet my needs and to meet the needs of other people. Yeah. And then I think I'll wait later on to talk about Jupiter and Taurus, but that's what's happening like as of today.
Ooh, a lot of stuff is happening and helpful to hear all of it because it does feel very aligned with a big, big process that I've been going through around, yeah, questioning my intuition, questioning my relationships, questioning most importantly, like how I'm showing up for myself, what you were saying, like in my body, like what daily practices do I need to be ruthless about and like really disciplined with. And I also just like started with my Saturn return. And so all of the clearing that has been happening in my life and feeling just these demolitions and getting things ripped away from me when I really wasn't ready, and fighting that and kind of finally feeling on the other side of being so humbled and being like, okay, like whatever is not for me, like go. Go with my blessing, go with my deepest love, go with my deepest gratitude, but like go, like I want the clearing, right? So, ooh, lots of good stuff. Um, I'm interested to see how it's gonna like interweave into like the next part of what we're gonna talk about, which is that I've been wanting to have you on the show for a while, and I was trying to figure out what the best kind of topic would be. And then this past week, I guess, you shared something on Instagram that was deeply, deeply resonant with my own questions of a lot of things that are coming up. And you were speaking specifically to the ways in which we view sexuality and the ways in which we move into romantic relationships in what I would say is like a very extractive and immature and disrespectful and like unkind and uninitiated expression of adult relationships, right? And none of that is to place any judgment on like other people or even on myself, because really I'm like having to look at myself, how I've shown up in relationships in the past and how I've moved through the world with my sexual energy, and more with like a deep compassion and understanding of like, wow, we just really, really did not receive the rites of passages that all of our ancestries had at one point to help us move into adulthood, and specifically to help us move into the understanding of like, what does it mean to love and experience a healthy sexual relationship with another adult human, right? So I guess what I would love to ask about that is like, what are all of these transits that you were just speaking about bringing up to the surface within the collective consciousness of like relationships, sexuality, and the nourishment of responsible intimacy that is so deeply lacking in our modern culture?
Yeah, I think the two primary transits that are really bringing these specific threads up are Venus currently going through Pisces in the retrograde that we just finished with that. And then also Jupiter's year-long transit through Taurus. Jupiter first entered sidereal Taurus on May 1st of 2024. And like I said, it'll be there till May 14th of this year. Um, and for those who may be curious or desiring, we've been in this Venus and Pisces energy since January 27th of this year. And it was retrograde from March 1st until April 12th. And it'll still be in Pisces until May 31st. So I consider us still in that Venus retrograde energy until almost the beginning of summer. Um, Venus is the planet of relationships, first and foremost, and its main goal is to magnify commonalities between peoples and to get us to see what we have in common with each other, what is same about us, so that way we can maintain harmony and peace, collaborate and work together with one another, and to ultimately make everyone's life easier, because life is easier when you're not going at it by yourself. Along with that, Venus is also sex and pleasure and what some cultures would consider to be romance. And so its retrograde is a time for us to reassess what it means to be in a relationship with people, what we want our relationships to look like, what we want our connections to look like, what we want our relationship to art and aesthetic and creativity to look like. And going through Pisces, this is all about getting clear on the spiritual purpose of these things. And the interesting thing about Venus's retrograde through Pisces is that Venus is actually exalted in Pisces. And what this means is when a planet is exalted, it means it's in the sign that it operates at its best, basically. So a way I've heard it described is like, all the planets have signs that they rule over. Venus rules over Taurus and Libra. So when Venus is in either Taurus or Libra, we consider it to be at home. And so when we are in our homes, in our houses, right, we're very comfortable because we've set up everything how we like it. You don't got to go around looking for everything. You're comfortable, you're familiar with it. You can really be good and work really well in your home and feel good in your home because you've curated it, hopefully, to the way you like it, and you have some sort of like familiarity with it because you're there a lot. It's your home. Now, think about that. That's like how Venus would operate in Taurus or Libra, or how any planet would operate in the sign that is at home. Then you take the sign that it's exalted in. Like I said, Venus exalts in Pisces. Now, think about your home, and now imagine that someone comes to you and they're like, hey, Claire, like your house is great, but I've built you another house and I've thought about everything you would ever need or want, all the things that you desire. And I have perfectly curated this house to be exactly that, to meet all that you'll never want for anything in this house. Obviously, most of us would probably pick that house over our homes. Or we could at least agree that we would be able to thrive better or function better in a house that is exactly specifically curated with no limitations to exactly what we would need to fulfill our life purpose, to fulfill our desires, whatever. That's what it means for a planet to be exalted. And so we can really understand what a planet's job is when we understand the signs that it's at home in, but especially the signs that it exalts in. And so Pisces being this sign of spiritual liberation, of spiritual intention, of psychic abilities, because Venus exalts there, that teaches us that the primary purpose of relationships, of sex, of art, of pleasure, of aesthetics is to be spiritually liberated, is to tap into psychic abilities, is to fulfill your dharma, your spiritual life purpose. And so as Venus has been transiting through Pisces, we hopefully have all been trying to get more clear on the spiritual purpose of our relationships. I personally believe that the majority of us do choose to reincarnate into human flesh when our souls are still like 100% in the spirit realm. And that we also are making karmic agreements with people that we will have relationships with on Earth before we come to Earth. And so I see the Venus and Pisces transit as a time for us to intentionally remember why I agreed with you, why I made an agreement with you to, record this podcast, one day when I was 25 on Earth, and why, we agreed to marry and befriend whoever, and like really just taking an assessment of who is in our life and how we are to relate and engage with people, and how that is supposed to help all of us spiritually evolve and fulfill our purpose. So we have that, and we're here all questioning what the purposes of relationships, what the purposes of art, what the purposes of sex and pleasure. And then we also have Jupiter's transit, year-long transit through Taurus. And Jupiter always spends about a year in each sign. And this is interesting because Jupiter's transit through Taurus is interesting because, as I said, Venus is at home in Taurus. It rules over Taurus. But also Jupiter rules over Pisces. So currently in this present moment, what's happening between Jupiter and Pisces is called parivartina in Sanskrit, or mutual reception in English. And this just means that we have two planets that are in each other's signs. And so they're kind of like tied together. When a planet is in a sign that's not its own, it is responsible to, or it has to answer, or it's under the authority of the planet that rules that sign. So while Venus is in Pisces, because Jupiter rules Pisces, it has to first like fulfill Jupiter's purpose and follow Jupiter's rules before it can do its Venus job and duties. And Jupiter, while it's in Taurus, has to do the same thing in relationship to Venus. So because they're answering to each other right now, they're basically like combined into one planet in a way. And so Venus being the planet of relationships, Jupiter is the planet of higher spiritual purpose and dharma and beliefs and convictions and intention. And so we are in this, like 4-month period, 3-month period, probably 4 months. Math is not like my strongest subject, but not being able to engage in relationships without considering our intention for them and the purpose of them. until right before the beginning of the summer. And Taurus specifically is this sign of cultural identity and how we come to understand ourselves understand who we are based on what we have in common with other people. So the example I like to use for Taurus often is that of like a sorority, like everyone in like Alpha, Chi Alpha or whatever knows they're in Alpha Chi Alpha or whatever because they all got the same like ribbon in their hair and they're wearing the same skirt and they know the same songs and chants and dance moves and they live in the same location, whatever, they act the same, they talk the same. That's how they know that like I'm part of this sorority. Um, we can expand this to like race and class and gender, right? I can look around and I know I'm Black because the culture I'm growing up in says that people who have skin that's at least as dark as mine, hair that's at least as kinky and coily as mine are Black. The people who listen to this type of music, who wear these type of things are Black. And that's how I know who I am. Or the same thing with like being a woman. And so as Jupiter has been in Taurus the last year, we've been um, given the assignment of assessing our beliefs and convictions around these cultural identities and questioning what it means to be the same as someone else and to take on a culturally assigned identity that groups us in with other people. So this can look like us questioning what it means to be our race, what it means to be our gender, what it means to be an employee or to be a part of a certain profession, what it means to be a friend or a spouse, or all of these things, and really the intention of those identities. And I personally believe we can understand what the intention of these identities are when we look to the sign that is opposite of Taurus, and that is Scorpio. And whereas Taurus is very much about like, I belong, I fit in because I look like everyone else. Taurus is the opposite, or sorry, Scorpio is the opposite, where it's like, I don't belong, I don't fit in because I actually don't look like everyone else. I don't fit in with everyone else. And I'm not able to conceal and conform like how I'm feeling in my body and my discomfort. And so when we look at that axis, I really see that like Taurus is here to help soothe like the discomfort that we have in our bodies when we're more on the Scorpio axis. And that discomfort arises from us being by ourselves, really, and not experiencing belonging. And so we have these cultural identities and roles so we can know who we are like, so we can know who is safe and who will take care of us. And so we can know who will take care of other people, right? Like we have the identity of mother, so that way we can understand who's responsible for that crying baby over there. So getting clear on why we label and call ourselves these things has been really big for us as a collective over the last year. And now with us being in this Venus retrograde energy at the beginning of this year, it's really like, what is the intention behind the relationships and connections we have with these roles, and what am I supposed to be doing? What is expected of me when someone calls me their friend, when someone calls me their spouse, when someone calls me their employee or whatever, their daughter. Yeah, did that answer the question?
Yes, definitely. And I think it's helpful to also recognize, I think it's so easy when we speak on the topic of relationship. Whenever we say relationship, I think it's very easy for us to go into like love, romance, sex, like partnership in that sense. But to expand out what relationship actually means, starting first within ourselves, what is our relationship to ourselves, to our bodies, to our spirits, really to our dharma in this life? Like, what did I come to this life and sign up for? What spiritual contracts did I make with myself and with God, with a higher power, with creator, whatever you want to call it? And then what contracts did I make with the people in this lifetime to learn and to evolve and to transcend and to like cut out all of the bullshit that would stop me from coming in and being able to be of service to humanity, and to so much bigger than humanity as well, right? Like, what is my cosmic role in this life? And I mean, all of this is deeply, deeply resonant for me in that I've been moving through a very, very painful breakup that I'm finally kind of on the other side of literally this past week, like after Venus went direct. And I know we're still in the shadow, but it was this very clear, important moment for me where I had a lot of different visions and a lot of different crazy spiritual, weird psychic stuff that happened, where I was able to see like, wow, yeah, that actually was the karmic contract. That process, that whole thing and what it taught me, that was the point of it. The point of it was not like the kind of like the romantic version of what we think love is supposed to be. Like it forced me into my deepest, deepest understanding of my own growth, my own evolution, and forced me to really, what is the word? Like shed, release, purge all of the parts of myself that it cannot coexist with my dharma. Like, actually, it's cool that I've gone through all of it and processed all of it, but especially moving into my Saturn return, like, it is not possible for me to keep this part of codependence, like, locked into my spirit. And thank God that this person came into my life and left when they did and showed me exactly like what has to be shed in order for the dharmic path to be walked with true integrity, right? And that can be romantic relationships, but that can also very much be with teachers, right? I had a big breakup with a teacher that happened that was like earth-shattering and very heartbreaking at the same time of this process. And it was like a big theme of exactly what you're speaking to, of how do we show up to our relationships with intention, not just what can I get from this person, not a transactional or extractive or like ego stroking, but really like, is my relationship with this person serving our highest growth, our highest evolution, our capacity to truly be of service, to walk our path in integrity and honesty and deep wholeness within ourselves? If I can't do that with you, then we're good. We don't need to do it, you know? So it is a beautiful, beautiful offering, I would say, and kind of transition into like some other things that we want to bring up specifically around, I guess now kind of the more romantic and the more sexual side of things, which was very much inspired by what you shared on Instagram this past week. You said something along the lines of, wait, I think I wrote it down. Let me see. Our ancestors would not recognize the way that we relate today. And I think we can speak to that in a lot of different realms of like how we show up in friendships, how we show up in relationship to the earth, how we show up in our family systems. But it is, I would say, the most painfully obvious in the ways that we are showing up in romantic and sexual dynamics. So, ooh, let's get into it. I'm kind of scared. I'm like, oh no.
Yeah. I'm maybe like 10% scared, but mostly excited. Yeah, I want to preface with that there's a lot of ancestors, and cumulatively, our ancestors lived in a variety of different ways, organized themselves in so many different ways that we probably could spend the rest of our lives counting all the different ways they organize themselves and their societies, pre, the times they were colonized and then afterwards. Um, so the like I said at the beginning, I'm mostly when it comes to like the indigenous peoples that I'm studying indigenous Dogon people, Mali, and then I'm studying the Dagara people, and their ways of relating. I am fully aware that that's only one way that certain groups of indigenous people organize their relationships. So I'm in no way advocating that we need to completely return to or copy what they've done. And in fact, there's things that I don't agree with both those groups of people and how they orient to relating. But when I say that they wouldn't recognize how we relate today, what I mean is both the Dagara and the Dogon, and really pretty much all indigenous people had very specific roles for community members, and they had very specific initiatory processes that people went through all throughout their lives. But one of the ones that would be most important is the initiation that young girls went through after their first period to be culturally and spiritually initiated into womanhood, and the initiation process the young boys went into to be culturally and spiritually initiated into manhood. Of course, after that, people had initiations where they were initiated into priests or priestesses or into elders, but not everyone necessarily goes on to become those things. So really, these things where people are being initiated to adulthood was often the most important initiation process they would go through. And even before that, many cultures, I know specifically the Dogon, would also have an initiation process that people would go through when they were about like 5 or 6 years old, to just initiate them into the culture and to open them up to just their role as human in the culture. Not necessarily gendered, because many of these societies don't even view children pre-puberty as being gendered. Really, they're considered more like genderless in a lot of ways. So specifically speaking to like women's initiation rites, because I've definitely looked more into that, you know, specifically for the Dagara people, after a girl has her first period, she is able to then embark on what is now like a 3 to 6 month initiatory period into womanhood, where her and other girls who have had their first period, they go off outside of the village with the priestesses and the women who are fully initiated elders, and they learn these mysteries of womanhood, which include, you know, how to work with their bodies and, you know, what their period is for, how to manage that, but also like the purpose of their breasts and their physiology and their anatomy, and what the expectation is of being a Dagara woman. And there is this amazing audiobook called Women's Wisdom from the Heart of Africa by Sabato Somé, where she details these initiation rites that young girls who are now women, who are becoming women, go into, and what the spiritual orientation or perspective on womanhood and the purpose of womanhood is to the Dagara. And so in addition to, you know, learning about their body parts that are exclusively female, they also learn to the importance of their using their voice as women. And actually one of the most profound parts of that book for me was she was talking about how when little girls in the village are like screaming, like, you know, in a playful way because they're having fun or whatever, just trying to see how loud they can get, they're actually encouraged to continue to scream and to scream even louder and as loud as they can, because everyone understands that the role of the woman is to be like the canary in the coal mine and to be this siren who can warn and alarm. And that, in addition to that, the main role of a woman for the Dagara is to hold the community together and to steward the community. And so these are things that, you know, thousands of years ago, we all were learning in some way that was specifically tailored to whatever culture our peoples were coming from. In addition to that, they also learn the purpose of their sexuality and their sexual energy. And of course, I can only imagine that the boys are learning the same thing. And they are learning how to properly channel their sexual energy. And we also too have to consider, you know, the environment that these people are in. A lot of us, when we think about like a girl having her first period, we imagine someone who's like 12 or 13, but oftentimes these girls were like actually closer to 15 or 16. And so there is like, you know, a big, those few years in age difference is a lot, especially when you're so young. And so learning about how to channel your sexual energy is probably more relevant to a 15 or 16-year-old than it is a 12 or 13-year-old. At least I hope, you know. And yeah, they learn about the purpose of that and how to curate that, and control that, which may be hearing controlling your sexual energy or urges may be triggering to some people, but the Dagara have this understanding that if you don't, you know, raise youth to understand their power and capabilities, that specific part of the human experience, sexuality, can get really out of hand. And I think we definitely witnessed that in the West with reckless sexual behavior amongst teenagers and then also adults, because these uninitiated teenagers just turn into uninitiated adults. In addition to that, the Dagara specifically, they practice arranged marriage. Now, I'm not necessarily like a proponent for arranged marriage or anything, but to them, they do this because marriage is not about romance. And actually, romance isn't a concept that exists to them. Um, and this is expanded more in another book by Sabbata Somé called The Spirit of Intimacy, where she's specifically talking about how the Dagara spiritually orient to relationships of all kind, but specifically like marital types of relationships. And how they don't like marriage or romance isn't a concept to them because there really is no need for romance when you are in a community that is actually rooted in everyone loving and valuing one another. And they don't have romance because their regular ritual is so important to this particular group of people. And specifically, many of their rituals are rooted around affirming the individual psyche and affirming the value that the person has, because they believe that most illness is rooted in self-devaluation, essentially. And even before someone is born, when their mother is still pregnant with them, they put the pregnant mother in a trance state so that way they can directly communicate to the fetus, and the fetus can tell the elders why they are coming to Earth, to the tribe, and like what their role and their job is. And so the value of the individual and what they are bringing to the collective is so important that they are interrogating the fetus, before that child is even born, essentially. And then once you are born, they basically spend your entire childhood constantly affirming and reminding you what your purpose is. And then when you go into your first initiation rites into adulthood, you are allowed to enter into this state where you get to see your soul making that karmic agreement. You basically get a replay of it. So that's very important to them. And because everyone is genuinely feeling love and appreciation from everyone, they don't experience romantic obsessions and like being in love and like having this like concept of like one soulmate that doesn't exist for them. And because of that, marriage isn't about romance or like being in love. Marriage is about being paired with someone who has a similar or complementary life purpose to you. So that way you can combine and help each other fulfill your purpose and bring your gifts back to the community. You get married to fulfill your duty to your community. You don't get married necessarily for yourself. And then because your marriage is for the community, your marriage is the community's business. And so if they notice you're constantly arguing with your husband, like they're going to pull you aside into kind of like what we would maybe recognize as like a courtroom setting. And the whole tribe is going to be like, y'all need to work it out, like what's actually going on here? Because if y'all break up, if this doesn't work, like the whole community is at risk because we need you. We need you to bring your gifts and to fulfill your purpose so we can all survive. And so our ancestors would not recognize the way that we relate today because we, at least in the United States, relate mostly like romantically out of a desire to really fill a void or a gap of affection and connection that we're supposed to be getting from multiple people. And sure, maybe that could be seen in like a polyamorous way, and polyamory or polygamy is practiced by the Dagara people, by some people, but really more in the like, you're supposed to feel genuine love from even your neighbor you're not that close to. And if you did, you wouldn't have a desire to fall head over heels in love. Honestly, none of us would have that desire if we didn't all grow up watching like Disney princess movies, like we've been very brainwashed to even want that. Because to them, the purpose of relationships is to fulfill your purpose, your life purpose. And it's not necessarily to like, bust a nut or, have a house with a picket fence or whatever. Um, yeah, I think that's where I'll start with that.
Oof, so good. So much beauty there, and very resonant to a lot of the learning and unlearning that I've done during my time living in South America, living in the jungle, and learning from a lot of different um, cultures who have their own initiation practices, as you were saying, like for women who go into their bleeding years, right? When they transition from like girlhood into womanhood, and what is your community role? And sitting with the elders, sitting with the priestesses, sitting with the medicine women and their mothers and their older sisters, and understanding like your time as a girl is done now. Actually, this is what this really means. And this is the level of responsibility that you have to take on as a woman now of your community. This is going to be your community role. And really affirming to a woman her value in the community and saying, like, this is what you came to Earth to do as a being that can steward and grow and create and nurture life and birth beautiful things, right? I've spoken about some of the kind of like lineage teachings that I've received during my time specifically in Colombia, but something that I'm thinking about a lot is that like, when I went to the jungle and lived there for a whole year and a half with my late and beloved teachers, Abuelo Kerwin and Abuela Maria, it was a really, really intense process with my sexuality. Not in that there was any kind of like sexual conversations even that happened at all with my teachers. I don't think I talked about a single person in the jungle about sex one time, you know? It was a deeply internal process of me cleaning and purging and having to come to like face to face with the way in which I had engaged with sex and romance and relationships and exactly what you're speaking to of like wanting to fill a void, right? And now I'm like through this kind of breakup process and through all of these transits that you're talking about, it is so deeply resonant to me. I'm at that place now where I'm like, I do not want to be with any person unless it is like exactly what you're speaking to, the kind of union that is between two people who are deeply whole in themselves, who have a strong community basis, who know what their role is amongst their family, amongst their friends, amongst their neighbors. They're clear in their dharmic path and they're connecting because working alongside one another is what brings their gifts forth, right? And how wonderful if you also really are attracted to this person. How wonderful if you have a beautiful, loving sexual union. But it's not this like, let me get this void filled with sex in the way that I certainly did pretty much up until this point in my life, right? And so I think people could be people could be listening to this conversation and be like, oh my God, but that's like very old school, very traditional, but like, what about love and what about this? And it's important questions to bring up of just kind of like, well, what does love really mean to you? Right? And do you only get it from one person? Not in the romantic sense, like you're saying, but like, what does it really mean to be loved by your family and to feel that and to know that? What does it really mean to be loved by your friends and to love your friends, not in an extractive way? What does it mean to be loved and oriented by your teachers and to be in right relationship? What does it mean to be loved by the earth? And then from that place, are you ready then to step into union with someone who can meet you, who can match you, and who is like just as committed to their path as you are? That's the point that we have to get to. Women and young men were taught that when they were like in their teenage years. We're all these like adults who are like in our like 20s and 30s and maybe even 40s or 50s, going through these initiatory processes that we were supposed to go through like way in our adolescence. And so it's something that you said on Instagram of like, we are grown adults who are relating and having sex like children and relationships and at least like romantic partnerships and marriages and sexual relationships are not something that kids should be doing, right? The youth should not be doing that shit. Like that is something for initiated adults. So I want to ask what is kind of like the difference in our culture between like sexual education and spiritual initiation in your view? I mean, I feel like you touched on it a little bit, but I feel like we're at a point in culture where there's a lot of like sex positivity and sexual education and sexual liberation and explore your bodies and all of that versus like what is the true spiritual initiation and the maturation process into a responsible sexual relationship with yourself, first and foremost, understanding your biology, understanding your reproductive health, understanding your hormonal cycle, understanding your fertility first, deeply internally, and then showing up in relationship in a sexual dynamic.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not really sure there is a difference because the spiritual initiation rites of passage would include the sexual education. I don't think you can be a spiritually initiated adult and show up in, a healthy sexual or marital relationship, specifically as a woman, because that's the perspective I know, and not know how to tell when you're in your fertile window. I don't really see how that would actually be possible. And I can't imagine that the Dagara women who are being initiated into womanhood aren't being told and taught those things. Of course they are. Um, I think the way that specifically the US orients sexual education when we're specifically talking about spaces that are actually educating people on sex and who aren't just like, that scene from Mean Girls, like you have sex, you get pregnant, and then you die, where there are people actually being told about uh diseases and real facts about pregnancy and how to prevent pregnancy and all these things and how physiology works. Like, of course, that's really important. But often the piece that is missing is, yeah, honoring like the emotions that come with that. And really like the discernment, teaching people how to discern who they should have sex with, how and when they should have sex. And even just acknowledging the importance of sex outside of preventing an unwanted outcome, whether that's disease or pregnancy, or like trying to extract pleasure from it. I think right now, the more like progressive or quote liberated sexual education is moving or has moved into a place that has a lot to do more with like teaching people how to make sex like a pleasurable thing, which I do think is a good thing. But it still is leaving out the part where we're talking about like the emotional and spiritual and like psychological impacts of coming together with another person in that way, and is really reducing sex to something that is like just mechanical when it's not. And also ultimately, like if we're not talking about the emotional and the spiritual and psychological impacts of sex, then it's not actually sex education. It's sex misinformation, really. And it's honestly grooming people, grooming youth to still have poor sexual experiences. And is really not a lot less harmful than like purity, culture, abstinence only education. Um, because to tell people to just wait till marriage and don't have any sex is to encourage people to like deny themselves in ways that are unhealthy. And then to also tell people that or to leave out information about how sex can affect us on emotional and psychological levels is also to deny us. And so how helpful is it really to know all the ways to prevent getting pregnant, to prevent having an STI, to know how like the female orgasm works and how to get your clitoral and vaginal orgasm or whatever, when you're trying to get that from a guy who doesn't care about you and no one told you that you should, before the more, what's more important than getting your 3 different types of orgasm is getting that with someone who like actually gives a fuck about you. um so yeah, the difference is that one is actually education. The initiation rites is actually education, and the sexual education is propaganda, really. It's propaganda and it's misinformation, and it's unfortunately leading people astray. And it's unfortunate because I do think a lot of people, I know that a lot of people who are teaching sexual education that is more informative or more liberated or goes into more detail now in the US are coming at it with the best of intentions and are really trying to right wrongs and undo harm. And ultimately, like if I was to send my child to get some sort of sexual education and I only had those things to choose from, I would prefer them to go to the more liberated version. But then I still have to do a lot of, when they come back, I have to give a lot of like exceptions and caveats and fill in a lot, which just tells me that we're really lacking people who are actually fully equipped to really teach and lead the youth in sexuality, because our leaders are also uninitiated adults as well. And I think we too have to question like the motives and what is driving an educator or any type of like sex positive influencer to position sex in this way where it's about, our liberation being rooted specifically as women and just like getting pleasure and feeling good and like knowing, the science behind our bodies, like to leave out the emotional and psychological part. Like you just have to ask yourself, like, why would someone do that? What kind of energy and space are they coming from? And what are they actually advocating for? And why do they think this is liberating?
Yeah, lots of really, really, really good stuff. And something that I was thinking about very deeply that I've felt in past relationships, especially more like my long-term ones, especially if you're living with a partner or, you're having consistent sex with that partner, you are taking on their spiritual karma. When you open up your body in that way, every single time that you have sex, every single time, it is possible that you could create a life with a person. I'm speaking very specifically like between a man and a woman, a fertile woman and like someone who's still in their bleeding years, and a man, to be clear. But even I would say within a dynamic of like the same gender, like, two men and two women, there is something that is being birthed between you, right? There is something that is being created between you. But when we're speaking from like a purely kind of biological sperm could potentially meet egg and create a human life. Every single time that you engage in a sexual act, you are saying to the universe, I would be willing to take on this person's whole lineage, actually. I am willing to take on their entire karma of their lineage as a woman because I would take their literal DNA into my body and create life and birth life, and then hopefully steward that life, steward that child, direct them, orient them, care for them. Like I would take on the responsibility of being a mother to not just my child, but to the entire lineage that the father comes from. And if I had been taught that when I was younger, to really say to yourself, do you want to take on that person's lineage? Do you want to take on their whole lineage's karma? Do you want to take on all of the stuff that has to be cleaned from them? Do you want to take on all of the work? Like, really, really sit with that in your body and sit with the reality of if you want to take that into your cells, into your blood, into your vessel. Like, is that something that you're ready to sign up for? Because as someone who I've been very open on this podcast about like my journey with sexuality, because it's been a very painful one. I've been through a lot of sexual abuse in my life. I've spent years cleaning and healing all of it. It's why I lived in the jungle for so long. Like I've been through the frickin' ringer with my sexuality, you know? And also, I'm so grateful for all of it because it has shown me exactly what happens when we don't receive that true level of education that you're speaking to, and that true level of adult initiation, not just sexual initiation, but adult initiation of what it means to walk with responsibility and to understand as a woman, I hold the power to decide, to discern whose lineages will continue on into the future, right? Like the lack of self-respect, the lack of understanding of that is what it means to be a woman. Had I known that in my heart, in my core, in my spirit, my life would have been so different. And also, likely, I wouldn't have gone to the jungle. I wouldn't have met my elders and my teachers. I wouldn't be the being that I am now. And so I'm grateful. And there's like everything's perfect, you know? But it's exactly what you're speaking to, of that deep, deep understanding of like the emotional, the psychological, the physical, right? Like what you're opening yourself up to physically, but the deep spiritual karmic contracts that you are making when you open up your body to someone who you know in your spirit, like this person doesn't respect me, or this person can't commit to me, even though they love me. This person can't share the same vision of a future with me, even though they're incredible and I value them. But at the end of the day, if I'm being truthful with myself, what I really, really know that I came to this earth to do, and I know this person can't do it with me. Am I really going to betray myself and betray them and lie to them and lie to myself and keep that sexual dynamic going, right? So there's like so many layers to the degrees of responsibility that we have to take on and that we haven't been taught because this has been lost for so long. And there's reasons for it, because when you start with sex and when you start with birth and when you come into like the conception of a new life on this frequency of codependency, of extraction, of like needing someone else to make you whole, that creates an entire culture that is very deeply enslaved to not really know deep in their body, I am loved, I am free, I am strong, I am powerful, because they were conceived out of that yeah, extraction is just the word that keeps coming up, an extractive dynamic.
Yeah. Mm, there's so much there. I think I really want to hit on the extraction piece. Um, as we were talking about before this call, like the purpose of sex between a male and a female is to have a baby, like on a biological level. That's why we can do this thing. But for the Dagara specifically, the purpose of sex to them, I'm sure it's to make a baby, but first is to connect with God. And for them, married couples go to have sex. And from my understanding, from what I've researched, it seems like it's really only understood that married people have sex with each other. Um, Married couples go to have sex when they want to talk to God, basically, and like receive a message. Which is not to say that sometimes couples don't just feel horny and have sex with each other. Maybe they do. I don't know. But a lot of the things that we see in our culture, like, excessive sexuality, drug addiction, alcoholism, a lot of those things just did not exist nearly in the same numbers way back in pre-colonial times with our indigenous ancestors. And also, of course, in a lot of indigenous communities now, especially in the Americas, those things have infiltrated for various reasons that we could do a whole nother episode on. But in some cultures that have had an opportunity to maybe guard or protect themselves more from that, are still more taboo because they are engaged in constant ritual. And so it's not that our desire to have this orgasm or our desire to feel high or drunk is wrong. It's actually that, like, as humans, we're designed to be constantly high, but we're designed to be constantly high off of spirit. And when you're engaged in regular ritual with your community, you do feel that. In the research I've done of the Dagara people, like when they engage in these community rituals with everyone, like they feel buzzed for days afterwards. And that's why they have the ability to approach engaging with substances or engaging with sexuality in a more intentional way, because this thing that we're looking to extract, we're getting that nutrient like all the time. And so if you're getting that all the time and then you come into a sexual encounter with your spouse or whoever to access or tap into God, then as you were saying, if a child is to be born from that, the energy that they come in from is like not going to be of one from extraction. It's going to be of one where they know that they're coming from God, essentially, because the intention their parents came into in that sexual encounter was to be one with God. And I think that connects to what you were saying about, this self-worth piece, and like how as women, we've stopped learning that it's our number one job is to decide whose lineage continues on and who doesn't. And there is this show on Netflix. I can't think of the name, but it's about the mating dances that male birds do for female birds. And I've only seen a few episodes, or I can't remember if it was a series or a documentary. I didn't see the whole thing, but what I did see was that, like, more often than not, the male birds get rejected. And they're really like they're busting ass, like whipping out, the most elaborate dances, really trying their hardest, and it's just like one male bird after the other. And most of the time the female bird's like, next, And I'm like, isn't that crazy that like birds have better discernment and more self-worth than us as human women? Like, I was like, yo, and to think about like what it means on the other side to be a man who actually gets chosen and who actually wins, and how we as women like honestly do a disservice to men and the cultivation of manhood when we're just out here choosing everybody. And that comes from a lack of self-respect and a lack of knowing who we are. And I think in this more modern liberated sexual education culture that's growing and developing in the US, like self-respect is something that is talked about more so in regards to consent and knowing how to like honor your no, and being able to understand and recognize like when your no has been validated, which of course is so, so, so important. But I think we're missing the like, what is it that we're fully consenting to? As you said, you were fully consenting to taking on someone's entire lineage. Whether or not you actually conceive a child or not, like you've let the one part of their DNA, of their like bodily fluids that can carry on more generations come inside of you. And I think some people may listen to this and think that we are maybe sounding similar to like the Christian church and like purity culture. And like, I remember growing up, I had friends who went to like these purity classes at their church where like they were given flowers and they were told that like their vagina or their virginity was like this flower, and that every time they have sex with a man, it's like a petal being ripped off. And, I know like maybe this sounds like similar to that. And I don't think that's what either of us are saying.
The way that I kind of feel about it these days, as someone who did a lot of exploration, okay? Like, you name it, I did it, okay? There's zero part of me that holds any judgment towards myself or towards anyone who is in that phase, because I did learn so much. And what I mostly learned was actually how bad it feels. What I really learned was like I was going to sex in this desire actually to heal, in this desire to know God, in this desire to really like be at peace in my body and my spirit after so much sexual abuse that I had undergone, right? It makes total sense that that was my path. And also, something that you touched on, which is so beautiful, is that it's very true. Within an intact culture, ceremony is a way of life. Like when you're going out into the fields to plant and harvest food, you're singing with your entire tribe, right? You guys are praying to the land, you're singing about the water, you're singing about the corn, you're singing about, the birds. Like when you are preparing food, you are in a ceremonial process. And then, when I was in the jungle, I was in ceremony with my elders 3 to 5 times a week, every single week for a year and a half. I was drinking an insane amount of ayahuasca. And I was sitting at the feet of my elders and listening to their stories, and I was praying in front of the fire, and I was singing, and I spent all day beating and weaving with my elder, Abuela Maria, on the porch with her and accompanying my teachers. And every day was a ceremony. And my sexual libido was like, I wouldn't say it was non-existent. I still felt like a sexual adult woman, but I was getting, like you were saying, those nutrients from so many other places, and how I felt connected to God was just like so clear that I wasn't turning to sex to heal me, because I felt so deeply held by the Creator in every single moment of my life, because it was like an intact ceremonial space, right? And now being in the States and being totally cut off from that and not being within a ceremonial context, I have to find ways to stay connected to that. And there's a lot of things that you can do, right? Like my art practice is that I still bead, I still weave, I still draw, I still paint, I still sing, I still dance. My meditation practice has become that. Working with mushrooms, I still love to work with mushrooms. I'm not in the jungle, and so I can't work with yahe, I can't work with ayahuasca right now. I will at some point when I can go back down to South America. But there's many plants that you can work with. It doesn't have to be the psychedelic ones. What is your ceremonial relationship with a chamomile tea before bed? And how do you find God in chamomile? Right? Like, how do you get into the shower and pray for the water and pray to just like release all the energy that is not yours and receive the nutrient and the nourishment and the connection of water in your spirit, and not have to like go and find some kind of validation somewhere else, right? And so I'm always thinking about how to interweave these ancestral knowings that are so deep in our bodies, so deep in our cells, so deep in our blood and our knowing, and bring them into a modern context where we do have to live in this world, where we do have to just move through it. And we signed up for it, actually. We chose this. But how do we bridge? So I guess maybe to close, I'd love to hear kind of your perspective of just like, how do we grow up as a culture? How do we maturate? How do we move into like higher levels of spiritual discernment of how we relate, not solely sexually, not solely romantically, but just like what is being asked of us right now? And from your perspective, what are just some things that people can start walking towards?
Yeah, as you were speaking right there, I was thinking about binge eating. This is something I've struggled with for pretty much my whole life. And a lot of practitioners who help people with eating disorders, specifically binge eating, they'll often, one of the exercises they'll have us do is like when we feel the desire to like go for that bag of chips and like eat the whole thing, to like ask ourselves why we're going for it, what's actually driving and motivating this. And so, as I said earlier, Venus in Pisces really asking us to consider our intentions behind sex and relating. I feel like the first thing we can do is to learn how to the uh slow down the reaction time between like I'm feeling a desire to have sex with this person and then actually having sex with them. And that in between time can be us getting clear on our purpose and intention and figuring out if we're actually okay with that purpose and intention. If you're like, I just want to have sex with them because I'm horny, like, okay, is there another way you can solve that? And then if not, like, is this person someone you want to not be horny with? Like, is it actually worth it? And what else are you taking on in exchange for that? Right. Like, um, so there is that, and like really getting clear on like, you know, with back to the binging example, like if I'm going for this bag of chips and I'm like, yeah, I'm just like really craving something salty right now, I can rewind like 30 minutes prior and be like, yeah, I'm craving something salty, but also like I just had a phone call that was really stressful. And I may be craving something salty and wanting to snack because I need some type of like oral and manual stimulation to regulate myself back down from this very stressful conversation. And something similar like that can also be driving us when we're seeking a sexual connection, specifically a sexual connection with someone who has already proven they don't have our best interests in mind. Like you said, they're not looking to commit or really care about us that much, or have yet to prove that they're even like a safe and viable partner for ourselves. I think also too, we need to get honest with ourselves about the programming, specifically through the media that we have all received about romance and dating. Like I said, like I majored in film, so I have spent a lot of time just analyzing media. And most things I've watched, if not all things I've watched, have just horrible examples and representations of what dating and sexuality and courtship is actually supposed to look like. And so when we are desiring a relationship, a specific type of relationship dynamic, I think it's important for us to think about where we first saw that, where we first got that idea. And along with that, also confronting like when we first got that idea and whether or not when we first got that idea, we were able to fulfill it. I think a lot of us, like we grew up getting these certain narratives about romance and dating, and then we went out into the real world and we were denied that, or we witnessed, other women get what we thought we wanted. And so now we're like constantly still seeking that as adults to like please this inner child or inner teen who just wanted to be saved by Prince Charming, or who was upset that, the football player you liked in high school like this other girl, and you wanted to be his girl or whatever. So yeah, really assessing like the programming and the brainwashing and being honest and admitting to ourselves that like 80 to 90% of what we want in relationships, we have been conditioned and like honestly brainwashed to want. Um, and then second to that, getting okay with orienting to relationships in a way or desiring connections that are not going to be socially approved. A lot of times we want to have sex with someone or we want to date someone because we've been told that a person who's like them, their approval or validation or their capacity to desire us has a direct connection to our own value and our worth. And we kind of already spoke about this. We're like seeking a sexual or romantic connection with a person or a specific type of person so that we can be like, oh, yeah, I'm actually worth something. Which also means that we need to learn how to disconnect being desired to being worthy. Because someone wanting you literally means absolutely nothing about your value. And then I would say that we all, like the last thing after you do that, after you do these things to like separate and detach from your cultural programming, especially if you are American, or, have spent a lot of time in like Western Europe, more of these like first world, top colonizer type of spaces, is to go do research into your lineage and figure out who your indigenous ancestors were and learn about how they oriented to sexuality. Like I said, the way that the Dagara and the Dogon orient is just one way that people do it. And it is, of course, a way that really resonates with me because I'm a direct descendant of these lineages. But there's countless ways that other people have organized sex and sexuality. So if what I've said here doesn't resonate with you, like that's fine. That doesn't take away from the fact that the way that we orient to it in the quote West is still like largely perverted, and that there's other indigenous paradigms and frameworks you could learn about and research to and lean into to have a more healthy sense of sexuality. And I think along with that too also requires us to like not only break up with the cultural programming we have received from the media, but also the cultural programming we've received from religion. I grew up very Christian and I was committed to saving myself waiting to have sex till I was married, up until I was like 19 years old. And when I stopped doing that and then, had sex with more people, and then decided I didn't want to do that. Like, I was kind of confused because I was like, okay, like growing up in the church, I definitely felt resonance to like waiting to have sex till I was married. And then I learned some other things, got exposed to things outside the church, realized that wasn't really resonant. And so then I went to the other side, did like the quote hoe thing, and then I was like, that's not working either. And so now I'm like, okay, what? And it can be sometimes like, triggering to like read how other indigenous people oriented to sexuality, because it can on the surface feel or sound like purity culture, but really that's just what purity culture like originated from and was contorted into. And so learning to detach like this propaganda kind of that to have a more controlled type of sexuality, or to have a more discerning sexuality, makes you conservative or makes you a prude or makes you super religious. That's not true either. So yeah, getting open and available to deprogramming all the things anyone has ever told you about sex and relating, and then also learning to come into right relationship with your body, with your gender, with your purpose and what you really want out of a relationship, and then building your self-confidence and your self-value and your self-worth, so that way you can reject sexual and romantic opportunities that are not in alignment with you, and not feel like you're missing out on something, or you let someone get away, or now you have to like continue being celibate when you don't want to. And I also think too, like reorienting our relationship to celibacy or abstinence, and seeing it as something that is not like depriving us. It's actually, I like to say that like when you say no, you're telling the universe that you're ready for what you keep saying you want. And so it's actually setting us up to be more in harmony or in coherence with like the frequency of romance and dating and sex that we're actually trying to pull into our lives. Because if you're saying that you want to bring in a man who loves you and cares for you and is going to provide for you, and you keep sleeping with Joe who won't text you back, the universe is looking at you like, okay, she's not actually ready. She's not actually ready, and there's no space for us to bring in, this other man that she says she wants, because Joe, who can't get a text back, is taking up all the space. So that's what I would say.
Throw Joe in the trash with the deepest love and deepest respect. No, and it's really true, everything that you just said, especially the very last part of like being really honest with yourself of like, oh, if you say you want this thing, but you continue to do the thing that is never going to get you that thing, are you actually honest? Do you actually want a really healthy and loving relationship between two whole people? Do you really want to birth a family on a foundation of wholeness? Do you really want to steward a community from a foundation of self-love and self-respect and union with someone who is at that same level? Or do you want to continue avoiding your dharma by playing around with someone who is playing around with you because you're scared of the work that it's going to take within yourself, truly within yourself at the end of the day, to come into right relationship with like self-respect? That's really what it is. Oh, there's so much. We could keep going, which we are going to technically keep going with our extended episode, but let's wrap it up. You can tell people how they can find you, how they can connect with you, any of your offerings. Please feel free to share.
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at astrolo-tea, ASTRALOTEA, or astral, like astral project, letter O, and then tea like you drink. And there's an underscore at the end of that on Instagram. And then I'm also at the same handle, no underscore, on TikTok. And also same handle, no underscore, on Substack. If you would like to book a reading, you can book a 30-minute, 60-minute, or 90-minute reading with me at astrolo-tea.setmore.com. We'll get a recording of your reading and copy of your birth chart. And just to remind everyone, it will be a sidereal reading with the sidereal zodiac. I didn't expand too much on all the different types of zodiacs, but this is specifically the sidereal zodiac that Vedic astrologers use. That's what I'll be reading in your chart. So if you're used to tropical or Western astrology, come prepared to have a different perspective on yourself, and to engage with a zodiac that is several thousand years older than the one that we're most familiar with in the US, hence me being an ancestral astrologer.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Christina. We're going to continue this conversation about something similar but also different, which is like both of our gender journeys. And, my listeners know that I was very, very attached to a non-binary identity for like 7 years. You shared that like only recently, within the past year, you've been moving away from like a gender fluid identity and really aligning back with what womanhood means to you. And so I'm really excited to hear your perspective on things and to give listeners, yeah, an opportunity to again continue opening their minds and deprogramming and questioning and getting uncomfortable and to see what comes. So thank you. It has been such a pleasure, and I'm excited to continue the conversation over on Substack.
Thank you. Definitely feeling is mutual.
Woohoo! All right, thank you guys.